In this lecture, you will briefly learn about the Revolutionary War. We will start with the Battle of Saratoga. The campaigns in the north, the west, and south. And the Treaty of Paris. In 1777, British General John Burgoyne assumed command of an army of 7,800 soldiers in Canada and began the Northern Squeeze on the Hudson River Valley. The logical second step in isolating New England should have been to advance British troops up the Hudson River from New York City to meet Bouillon, but British General William Howe decided instead to try to capture Philadelphia. Burgoyne awaited reinforcements from the west, but the group encountered Americans who refused to surrender at Fort Sandwich. The British suffered a significant loss at Fort Sandwich, depriving General Bouillon of the additional troops that he expected to carry out his Hudson River attack. Then the Continental Army secured an important victory in the Second Battle at Saratoga, forcing Bouillon to surrender to American forces on October 17, 1777. While the Battle of Saratoga was taking place, Benjamin Franklin had been in Paris trying to secure a treaty of allegiance with the French. Since the Americans had declared its independence from Britain, the French had agreed to help the Americans. However, the French were reluctant to fully back the Americans. But with the American win at the Battle of Saratoga, the French finally felt secure to become fully committed in helping the Americans. Thus, the Battle of Saratoga will be instrumental in winning the Revolutionary War because it will convince France to have its official support for the Americans. Although the British will be defeated at the Battle of Saratoga, General Howe will succeed in occupying Philadelphia in September 1777. Upon the siege of Philadelphia, the British government proposed a negotiated settlement, not including independence, to end the war. The American side refused. Shortly after, the American arms and food supplies ran low, and the American army suffered a devastating winter at Valley Forge on account of disease and desertion. Washington blamed the people for lack of support. Evidence of corruption and profiteering was abundant, with army suppliers often providing defective food, clothing, and gunpowder. Despite these shortcomings, the Continental Army will continue to fight. Fighting on the Atlantic coast slowed between the fall of 1777 and the summer of 1778, but in the interior western areas, native tribes struggled against the pro-independence Americans. Loyalists and Native Americans together raided many farms throughout 1778, killing and capturing residents. American militiamen responded in kind. In the summer of 1779, General Washington authorized a campaign to wreak total destruction and devastation on all the Iroquois villages of central New York. 40 Native American towns were destroyed. Much farther to the west, another complex story of alliances and betrayals between American militiamen and Native Americans unfolded. In Tennessee, militias attacked Cherokee settlements, destroying 36 villages and burning fields and livestock. By 1780, very few Native Americans remained neutral. Most sided with the British or fled to Spanish territory. The occasional Native American support for the American side had emerged out of a strategic sense that the Americans were unstoppable in their westward pressure, and that it was better to work out an alliance than to lose in a war. But American treatment of even friendly Native Americans showed that there really was no winning strategy for the Native American tribes of the region. As the war went on, the king was determined to crush the rebellion. And he encouraged a new strategy for victory, which abandoned New England and instead focused on the South, thought to be easier for the crown to recapture. The British hoped to recapture the southern colonies one by one, restore the Loyalists to power, and then move to the north to the more problematic middle colonies, saving New England for last. Georgia was the first target, and it fell easily at the end of December 1778. The next target was South Carolina, and despite the presence of 10 Continental regiments, finally surrendered in May of 1780. Part of the strategy to win in the South also included the recruitment of runaway slaves. From Charleston, British General Henry Clinton announced that slaves owned by rebel masters were welcome to seek refuge with his army. Several thousand responded by escaping to the coastal city. The escaped slaves were of immediate use to the British as knowledgeable guides to the surrounding countryside and as laborers in service to the army, building defensive fortifications. Escaped slaves with boat piloting skills were important to the British as they navigated the inland river systems of the southern colonies. Also, the new British strategy succeeded in 1780 in part because of information about American troop movements that was secretly furnished to the British by Benedict Arnold, the one-time American hero of several key battles. Arnold's plot to deliver West Point to the British was foiled by the capture of the messenger carrying plans to the fort's defense from Arnold to General Clinton. Shock at Arnold's treason revitalized rebel support in western South Carolina, an area that Cornwallis thought was pacified and loyal. The backcountry of the South soon became the site of guerrilla warfare. The British Southern strategy counted on sufficient loyalist strength to hold reconquered territory as Cornwallis' army moved north, but the backcountry civil war proved this assumption false. The Americans won few major battles in the South, but they ultimately succeeded by harassing the British forces and preventing them from foraging for food. Moreover, essential help for the Americans arrived as a result of the victory of Saratoga, which convinced the French to enter the war. A formal alliance was signed in February of 1778. French support was initially slow, but French help would prove indispensable to the American victory, particularly after the French Navy arrived. Not to mention that when France formally joined the war, some British officials began to wonder whether the fight was worth continuing. Then, in 1781, Cornwallis and his troops moved back to North Carolina and then to Virginia, where they achieved some minor victories. Then the French and Americans decided to take control of the Chesapeake Bay. By the time British ships arrived to defend the Chesapeake Bay, the French fleet was already there. A 5-day naval battle left the French Navy in control of the Virginia coast. The French Navy's control of the Chesapeake Bay proved to be the decisive factor in ending the war because it prevented any rescue of Cornwallis' army. General Cornwallis and his 7,500 troops now faced a combined French and American army numbering over 16,000. Cornwallis surrendered in October 1781 at Yorktown. The surrender at Yorktown proved to be the end of the war with England, but it took some time for the principal combatants to realize that. The frontier areas in Kentucky, Ohio, and Illinois still blazed with warfare. The British Army still occupied 3 coastal cities, including New York, which required the Continental Army to stay in the field. The peace treaty, however, was 2 years in the making. The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783. The treaty resulted in 10 Articles of Peace agreed upon by commissioners from America, Britain, and France. It acknowledged the United States to be independent, drew the western boundary of the country at the Mississippi River, and guaranteed that creditors on both sides would collect their debts. The treaty also promised the quick withdrawal of British troops from American soil. As in the treaty that ended the 7 Years' War, no article in this treaty recognized the Indians as players in the conflict, and Indian lands were assigned to the victors as though they were uninhabited. Although Britain conceded defeat, the Indians did not. Despite the treaty provisions regarding property, England aided in the emancipation of perhaps 10,000 slaves. For our refugees able to state that they had been with the British for more than a year, Sir Guy Charleston, the British commander in New York, issued certificates of freedom, which deemed the former slaves were no longer property to be returned. With the treaty finally signed, the British began their evacuation of New York, Charleston, and Savannah, a process complicated by the sheer numbers involved, including soldiers, fearful loyalists, and runaway slaves by the thousands. That is all for now, but make sure you watch the next video lectures to learn about the early American Republic.